Alex had this thing about routines. Every morning at 7:30, he would walk into the small coffee shop on Maple Street with his black backpack and laptop. The same table by the big window, the same order, large black coffee, and whatever. Pastry looked good that day. He wasn't being picky or difficult. Life just felt easier when some things stayed the same. The coffee shop was called Bean there, and it had this cozy feeling that made you want to stay longer than you planned. Old wooden tables, the smashed chairs, and the smell of fresh coffee. Beans that seemed to live in the walls. The owner was this kind older lady who always remembered everyone's order. She had gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and wore colorful aprons. That made the whole place feel more like someone's kitchen than a business. Alex worked at a small advertising company downtown, but his real dream was writing. Every morning, before his regular job, he would spend 2 hours at that window table, typing away on his laptop. Sometimes he wrote stories. Sometimes he worked on the novel he had been thinking about for 3 years, but never quite finished. The coffee shop gave him the quiet space his tiny apartment couldn't provide. That's when he first noticed her. She came in during his second week of this new routine. A woman who looked to be around his age, maybe 28 or 30, with reddish-brown hair that caught the morning light coming through the front windows. She always ordered the same thing too, a cappuccino with extra foam, and always sat at the counter, on one of those tall stools that faced the window. What caught his attention wasn't just how she looked, though she was definitely pretty in that natural way that didn't seem forced. It was what she did while she sat there. She read books. Real books with worn covers and pages that had been turned by many hands before hers. In a world where everyone stared at phones and tablets, seeing someone with an actual paperback book felt almost magical. Alex found himself getting curious about what she was reading. From his angle by the window, he could sometimes catch glimpses of the covers when she set the book down to sip her coffee. Romance novels, mystery books, classic literature. She seemed to read everything. Sometimes she would smile at something on the page, and Alex would wonder what made her happy. Other times she would frown or shake her head, clearly disagreeing with whatever character had just made a bad decision. The problem was, Alex had gotten really good at avoiding people over the past year. His last relationship had ended in a way that left him feeling like maybe he wasn't great at the whole dating thing. His ex-girlfriend had told him he was too quiet, too in his head, too focused on things that didn't matter. After that, he decided it was safer to keep to himself. Work, write, go home, repeat. Simple and safe. But this woman at the counter was making his simple routine feel complicated. He would catch himself looking over at her reflection in the window, instead of focusing on his writing. When she laughed at something in her book, he would pause his typing just to hear the sound. When she gathered her things to leave, he would feel disappointed even though they had never spoken a single word to each other. The coffee shop owner definitely noticed what was happening. She would bring Alex his coffee and glance over at the woman at the counter, then back at him with this knowing smile that made him feel like a teenager again. One day she even commented about how nice it was to have young people who appreciated quiet mornings and good coffee. Alex pretended not to understand what she meant, but his face turned red anyway. 3 weeks into this routine, something started to shift. The woman began looking his way sometimes, not staring, just quick glances when she thought he wasn't paying attention. But Alex was always paying attention now, even when he pretended to be deep in his writing. He would see her look over, and he would quickly focus on his laptop screen, his heart beating a little faster for reasons he couldn't quite name. He started wondering about her life outside the coffee shop. Did she work nearby? Was she a student? Did she live alone like he did? The book she read suggested someone who had time to get lost in stories. But everyone made time for the things they loved. Maybe she was like him, someone who carved out these morning hours for herself, before the rest of the world demanded her attention. The whole situation felt like a puzzle he couldn't solve. He wanted to know more about her, but he also didn't want to be that guy who bothered women who were just trying to enjoy their coffee and books in peace. His mother had raised him to be respectful. and his own experiences had taught him that not every moment of interest needed to become a conversation. So he developed his own routine within the routine. Steal a glance when she walked in. Notice what book she was reading. Pay attention to whether she seemed happy or sad or frustrated with whatever story she was living through. Wonder what her voice sounded like. Wonder what she did for work. Wonder if she ever noticed him too. The coffee shop owner started making little comments that weren't quite comments. Things like how the morning regulars made the place feel like a community, or how some people seemed meant to cross paths eventually. Alex would nod and smile and change the subject, but inside he wondered if she was right. Maybe some connections were meant to happen, even if they took time to unfold. By the end of his first month at being there, Alex had written more than he had in the previous 6 months combined. Something about the routine, the peaceful atmosphere, and yes, the interesting woman at the counter had unlocked something in his creativity. His stories were getting better, more honest, more real. Maybe this whole situation was good for him, even if nothing ever came of it. But deep down, he hoped something would. The small changes started so gradually that Alex almost missed them. It was like watching the seasons change. You don't notice it day by day. But then suddenly the leaves are different colors and you realize everything has shifted while you weren't paying attention. It began with the coffee shop owner doing little things that seemed innocent but felt intentional. When Alex came in one Thursday morning, she mentioned that she had just gotten in a new shipment of books from a regular customer who traded them in for coffee credit. She pointed to a small shelf by the window where people could take books or leave books they had finished. Alex had never noticed it before, probably because he was always focused on getting to this table and starting his work. But now he found himself glancing at that bookshelf, wondering if the woman at the counter ever looked at it too. She had to walk right past it to get to her usual seat. The next morning, he noticed she had stopped to look at the books, running her finger along the spines like she was reading titles. She pulled out a thin blue book, looked at the back cover, then put it back and continued to her seat with the book she had brought from home. Alex found himself thinking about that blue book all day. When he came in the next morning, it was still there. During his lunch break at work, he kept wondering what book it was and why she had put it back. Was it something she had already read, something that didn't interest her? By the time he got home that evening, he had convinced himself to check out that blue book the next morning. The blue book turned out to be a collection of short stories by an author Alex had never heard of. The back cover said it was about people making unexpected connections in everyday situations. Alex almost laughed at how perfectly that fit his current situation. He left his regular tip for his coffee and tucked the book into his backpack, planning to read it at home that evening. But when he looked up from gathering his things, the woman at the counter was watching him, not staring, not making it obvious, but definitely looking his way with what might have been curiosity. Their eyes met for just a second before she went back to her own book. But Alex felt that moment like a small electric shock. She had noticed him taking the book. Did that mean something? Was she curious about what he was reading the same way he was curious about her books? That night, Alex read 3 of the short stories before falling asleep. They were good, the kind of writing that made you think about your own life differently. One story was about 2 people who rode the same bus every day for months before finally talking to each other. Another was about neighbors who left notes for each other without ever meeting face to face. All the stories were about connections that took time to develop, relationships that grew slowly and carefully. The next morning felt different. Alex brought the blue book with him and set it on his table where it would be visible. He told himself he was just planning to read it if he finished his writing early. But part of him wondered if the woman at the counter would notice. He spent more time than usual organizing his laptop and coffee cup, making sure the book cover was clearly visible from the counter. She noticed. Alex saw her glance over at his table, paused when she saw the book, then look at him with what was definitely interest this time. She opened her own book but didn't seem to be reading. Instead, she kept glancing his way, like she was thinking about something. Alex tried to focus on his writing, but his concentration was completely broken. Every few minutes he would look up and catch her looking over at him. Finally, she did something that surprised both of them. She stood up, walked over to the bookshelf, and pulled out a different book, a red paperback that had been pushed between two larger books. She walked back to her seat, but instead of sitting down immediately, she held up the red book just high enough for Alex to see the cover. It was another collection of short stories. This one about people who almost met but didn't, and what happened when they finally did. Alex felt his face get warm. She was definitely trying to tell him something, but he wasn't sure what. Was she suggesting they both liked the same kind of stories? Was she hinting that she had noticed his book choice? Or was she doing what he had done, putting a book where someone else might notice it and wonder about the person reading it? He decided to find out. When she went up to the counter to get a refill on her cappuccino, Alex walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out another book, this one green, about to people who met in a library and fell in love over the shared love of books. He brought it back to his table and set it next to the blue one, making sure both covers were visible. When she returned to her seat and saw the second book, she actually smiled, not at Alex directly, but at his table, at the books, at the whole situation they had created without saying a word. She sat down and opened her red book, but Alex could see she was smiling as she read. This became their new routine. Every few days, one of them would add a new book to their collection. Alex would bring books about writers and artists, about people chasing dreams and taking chances. She would choose books about travelers and adventurers, about women starting over and finding themselves. They never discussed the books directly, but Alex started to feel like he was getting to know her through her choices. The coffee shop owner was definitely enjoying the whole thing. She started making comments about how nice it was to see young people reading real books, how books could bring people together in ways that technology couldn't. She would refill their drinks and glance at whatever books they had that day, nodding approvingly at their selections. One rainy Tuesday morning, Alex came in to find that the woman wasn't at her usual spot. Her absence felt louder than any conversation they had never had. He kept looking at the empty stool, wondering if she was sick or traveling or just sleeping in on a gloomy day. He tried to write, but his thoughts kept drifting to whether she was okay. When she walked in 30 minutes later, shaking rain from her jacket, Alex felt relieved in a way that surprised him. She was carrying a different bag than usual and looked a little flustered, like her morning routine had been disrupted too. She ordered her cappuccino and sat down, but instead of pulling out a book, she just sat looking out the window at the rain. Alex found himself writing a story about someone, waiting for a person they had never spoken to, about how you could miss someone you didn't really know. He wrote about coffee shops and books and rainy mornings, and the strange ways strangers could become important to your daily happiness. When he looked up an hour later, she was reading over his shoulder. Not obviously, not in a way that invaded his privacy, but she had turned her stool slightly so she could see his laptop screen. She was reading his story about missing someone you had never met, and she was smiling. That's when Alex realized their careful dance of books and glances had been building towards something bigger. They weren't just to people who happened to like the same coffee shop. They were to people who had been trying to get to know each other without taking the risk of actually talking. But all those books, all those looks, all those careful morning routines had been conversations of a sort. Now, the question was whether either of them was brave enough to turn those silent conversations into real words. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. Except the woman at the counter wasn't there. Alex had gotten so used to seeing her red-brown hair catching the early sunlight that her empty stool felt wrong, like a song missing its melody. He ordered his coffee and sat at his usual table, glancing at the door every few minutes and telling himself he was just curious, not worried. By 8 o'clock, he had written maybe 2 sentences. His concentration was completely shot. He kept looking at the bookshelf where their little collection had grown over the past few weeks. Today there was a new edition, a small yellow book, about second chances that he was sure hadn't been there yesterday. Had she left it for him to find? The thought made his stomach flutter with something between excitement and nervousness. At 8:30, she finally walked in, and Alex immediately knew something was wrong. Her usual calm composure was gone. She looked like someone who had been crying or trying not to cry, or maybe both. Her hair was pulled back messily, and she was wearing a sweatshirt instead of her usual neat button-up shirts. She ordered her cappuccino, but her voice was quieter than normal, and she kept glancing around the coffee shop like she wasn't sure she wanted to be there. Instead of sitting at the counter, she chose a small table in the corner, further from Alex but also further from everyone else. She pulled out her phone instead of a book, stared at it for a minute, then put it away and just sat looking out the window. Alex could see her reflection, and she looked lost in a way that made his chest tight with concern. He tried to go back to his writing, but it was impossible. This woman had become part of his morning routine, part of what made the coffee shop feel like home. And seeing her upset made him upset too. It was strange how you could care about someone you had never actually talked to. But the feeling was real and growing stronger every minute. 20 minutes passed. She ordered a second cappuccino, but barely touched it. She checked her phone again, typed something, deleted it, put the phone away. Alex found himself making up stories about what might be wrong. Bad news from family, problems at work, a relationship ending. He realized he didn't even know if she was single or dating or married. All those weeks of careful observation, and he still knew almost nothing about her actual life. That's when she surprised him completely. She stood up, gathered her things, and walked toward the door. But instead of leaving, she stopped at his table. Alex looked up from his laptop screen, and for the first time in 2 months, they were face to face. Close enough to actually have a conversation. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, and her voice was softer than he had imagined, with a slight shakiness that suggested she was nervous about approaching him. "I know we don't know each other, but I've been sitting in this coffee shop watching you work every morning for weeks, and you always look so peaceful, like you have your life figured out." Alex almost laughed, but caught himself. She thought he had his life figured out. Him? The guy who spent most of his time avoiding real human connection and hiding behind his laptop screen. "Today I got some news that kind of turned my world upside down," she continued, looking down at her hands. "Nothing terrible, just unexpected. And I was sitting over there feeling sorry for myself when I realized that I've been wanting to talk to you for weeks, but never had the courage. So I guess I'm taking today's weirdness as a sign that maybe I should stop being such a coward." She looked up at him then, and Alex could see that her eyes were a little red round the edges, but also determined. She was scared but doing this anyway, which made her seem incredibly brave to him. "I'm sorry," she said again. "This is probably weird and inappropriate. You're just trying to work and I'm interrupting with my personal drama. I should go." She started to turn away, and Alex felt something like panic rise in his chest. This was it. This was the moment he had been both hoping for and dreading for 2 months. She was giving him an opening, maybe the only one he would get. And if he let her walk away now, they would go back to being strangers who just happened to drink coffee in the same place. "Wait," he said, closing his laptop and standing up. "Please don't go." She stopped and turned back to him, and Alex realized he had no idea what to say next. All those weeks of wondering what her voice sounded like, what she would be like to talk to, and now that the moment was here, his mind was completely blank. "Are you okay?" he finally managed, which seemed like the most important question. She almost smiled at that. "Not really," she admitted, "but I'm better than I was an hour ago. Sometimes you just need to do something that scares you a little bit, you know." Alex knew exactly what she meant. Standing here talking to her was the scariest thing he had done in months, but also the most right thing. All those careful glances and book exchanges had been leading to this moment, and now that it was happening, he didn't want it to end. "I've been wanting to talk to you too," he told her, and saw surprise flash across her face. "I just kept telling myself I was respecting your privacy or being polite, but honestly, I think I was just scared." Scared of what? She asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. Scared of being rejected. I guess. Scared of being that guy who bothers women who are just trying to enjoy their coffee and books in peace. Scared of finding out you weren't as interesting as I imagined you were. He paused, then added, though I'm pretty sure you're more interesting, not less. She definitely smiled at that. You've been imagining things about me? Only for about 2 months, Alex admitted, feeling his face get warm. I noticed you were reading different books every few days. And I kept wondering what kind of person reads mystery novels on Monday and poetry on Wednesday, and romance novels on Friday. You seem like you contain multitudes. Walt Whitman. She said approvingly. I like a man who quotes poetry, even indirectly. The fact that she got the reference made Alex's heart skip a little. I like a woman who reads actual books in an age of smartphones and tablets. They stood there for a moment, both seeming to realize that they had crossed some invisible line from strangers to people who were actually talking to each other. The coffee shop continued buzzing around them, but Alex felt like they were in their own small bubble of conversation. Would you like to sit down? He asked, gesturing to the empty chair at his table. I can move my stuff. She hesitated for just a second, then nodded. Actually, would you mind if we walked instead? I think I need some fresh air and movement. Sometimes sitting still makes everything feel worse. Alex was already closing his laptop and packing his bag. I know exactly what you mean. As they headed toward the door together, the coffee shop owner caught Alex's eye and gave him the biggest smile he had ever seen her wear. She had been watching their careful dance for weeks, and now she was seeing it finally turn into something real. Outside on the sidewalk, Alex and the woman whose name he still didn't know started walking slowly down Maple Street. The morning air was crisp and clean, and Alex felt like he was beginning an adventure he had been preparing for without knowing it. I'm David, by the way, he said as they reached the corner. Rachel. She replied, it's nice to finally meet you, David. And just like that, after 2 months of wondering and watching and careful avoidance, they were no longer strangers. Walking down Maple Street with Rachel felt both completely natural and completely surreal. For 2 months, David had watched her from across the coffee shop, building an entire imaginary version of who she might be. Now she was real and walking beside him, and somehow she was even more interesting than he had imagined. So what was the news that turned your world upside down? David asked as they paused at a crosswalk. He wasn't sure if it was too personal to ask, but she had brought it up, and he found himself genuinely wanting to know what had made her sad. Rachel was quiet for a moment, like she was deciding how much to share with someone she had just met, but somehow didn't feel like a stranger. I got a phone call from my doctor this morning, she said finally. Nothing scary. Just test results that mean I need to make some changes in my life. The kind of changes that make you realize you've been putting things off for too long. She looked over at him as they crossed the street. I've been divorced for about a year, and I moved here to start fresh, but I've been kind of hiding from life ever since. Working from home, keeping to myself, only talking to people when I absolutely have to. The coffee shop was literally the most social part of my day, and even there I just sat quietly reading books. David almost stopped walking. You work from home too? Freelance graphic design, Rachel said. What about you? I always wondered what you were typing so intensely every morning. I work at an advertising company downtown, but the typing was personal stuff, stories, mostly. I've been trying to write a novel for about 3 years, but never seemed to finish anything. David felt embarrassed admitting this. The coffee shop was the only place I could actually focus. My apartment is too quiet and too full of distractions. What kind of stories do you write? Rachel asked, and she sounded genuinely interested. Usually about people who are stuck somehow, David said, then realized how that sounded. I guess I write what I know. People who want to make changes but are afraid to take the first step. People who watch life happen instead of participating in it. Rachel stopped walking and looked at him. That's exactly how I've been feeling for the past year. Like I'm watching everyone else live their lives while I sit on the sidelines, reading about fictional people having adventures. They had wandered into a small neighborhood park without really paying attention to where they were going. There was a bench under a big oak tree, and Rachel gestured toward it. "Can we sit for a minute? I feel like we're having the kind of conversation you need to sit down for." As they settled on the bench, David realized this was the longest conversation he had had with anyone besides coworkers and cashiers in months. Rachel was easy to talk to in a way that surprised him. He had expected their first real conversation to be awkward and stilted, full of the usual small talk that never led anywhere interesting. Instead, they seemed to be jumping straight into the real stuff, the thoughts and feelings he usually kept to himself. "Can I ask you something?" Rachel said, turning slightly to face him on the bench. "When you were watching me in the coffee shop, and yes, I knew you were watching, just like you probably knew I was watching you back, what did you think about?" David felt his face get warm. "You really want to know?" "I really want to know. I wondered what you did for work, whether you live alone, what made you choose the books you read. I wondered if you were happy or lonely or somewhere in between. I made up stories about your life that were probably completely wrong." He paused, then decided to be completely honest. "I wondered what your voice sounded like and whether you would think I was interesting if we ever talked." Rachel smiled. "You want to know what I wondered about?" David nodded. "I wondered if you were writing about real things or made up things. I wondered if you were naturally quiet, or if something had made you that way. I wondered if you noticed that I was reading different books partly because I was hoping you would wonder about them." She laughed. "I even started choosing books based on what I thought might interest someone who spent so much time writing stories." "The book exchanges," David said, understanding flooding through him. "You were picking those books for me to see. Some of them," Rachel admitted. "The one about second chances was definitely for you. I had been thinking about how we kept almost talking but never quite getting there, and I thought maybe the universe was trying to tell us something." David looked at her sitting there in the morning sunlight, being more honest about her thoughts and feelings than most people were after knowing each other for months. "So what did your doctor say that made you decide to stop hiding from life?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment, picking at a loose thread on her sweatshirt. "She told me I need to start taking better care of myself. Not anything dramatic, just better food, more exercise, less stress. But it made me realize that I've been treating this whole year like a break from real life, instead of actually living it. I've been so careful to avoid getting hurt again that I forgot how to take chances on good things, like talking to strangers." "In coffee shops?" David asked. "Exactly like that." Rachel looked at him with something that might have been gratitude. "I sat in that corner table this morning feeling sorry for myself and thinking about how I've been wanting to talk to you for weeks but was too scared of rejection or awkwardness or whatever. And then I thought, what's the worst that could happen? You could say you weren't interested in talking, and I would be exactly where I was before, a person sitting alone in a coffee shop. But you wouldn't have been where you were before." David pointed out, "You would have been someone who tried something scary and survived it, even if it didn't work out." Rachel looked surprised. "That's a very wise way to look at it." "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," David said, "about how staying safe and comfortable isn't actually safe at all. It's just a different kind of risk. You risk missing out on everything good because you're so focused on avoiding everything bad." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching people walk their dogs through the park and joggers heading to work. David found himself thinking about all the mornings he had spent wondering about Rachel, and how the reality of talking to her was so much better than any conversation he had imagined. "Can I tell you something embarrassing?" Rachel said eventually. "Please do." "Sometimes I would time my coffee shop visits based on when I thought you would be there. If I woke up late, I would rush to get there before you left. If I finished work early, I would go in the afternoon hoping you might come in for a second coffee." She shook her head. "I organized part of my schedule around a person I had never spoken to." David laughed. "I did the exact same thing. I started getting to the coffee shop earlier because I wanted to see you arrive. I would stay later than I meant to because I didn't want to leave before you did. I probably wrote some of my worst stuff on days when you didn't show up." Because I was too distracted wondering where you were. Really? Really? I wrote an entire story about someone who falls in love with a woman he sees on the bus every day but never talks to. It was terrible and obvious and completely about you. Rachel grinned. I want to read that story. No, you absolutely don't. It was the kind of writing that made me question whether I should give up on the whole novel idea. Don't give up, Rachel said, and she sounded serious. The world needs more stories about people who are afraid to take chances. Maybe someone will read one of your stories and decide to be braver than they thought they could be. David looked at her, this woman who had been brave enough to approach his table that morning when she was feeling lost and scared, and felt something shift inside his chest. Maybe someone already has. The sun was getting higher, and David realized they had been talking for over an hour. In the normal world, he would be at his office by now, sitting through his first meeting of the day and thinking about lunch. Instead, he was sitting on a park bench with Rachel, feeling more awake and alive than he had in months. Should we head back? Rachel asked. But she didn't sound like she really wanted to. Should we? David asked back. I mean, yes, eventually. We should probably return to our normal lives. But this feels like the kind of morning that shouldn't be rushed. Rachel smiled. I was hoping you would say that. 3 months later, David still went to being there every morning. But now the routine looked completely different. Instead of sitting alone at the window table, he shared it with Rachel. Instead of stealing glances at someone across the room, he looked directly at the person sitting across from him, still sometimes amazed that she was real and that she seemed to enjoy his company as much as he enjoyed hers. They had learned to be careful with each other in the best possible way. After that first long conversation in the park, they had both been eager to see each other again, but also aware that they were two people who had been hurt before and needed to take things slowly. Their second meeting was planned, coffee on Thursday morning, same time, same place. Their third was spontaneous. Rachel texted David on a Saturday afternoon, asking if he wanted to go to the used bookstore downtown. By the end of the first month, they had developed their own rhythm, coffee together most mornings, but not every morning. Sometimes Rachel would wave hello and settle at the counter with a book, giving David space to write. Sometimes David would work at home, giving Rachel the coffee shop to herself. They were both independent people who had learned to value their alone time, and they tried to make sure their new friendship enhanced their individual lives. Instead of taking them over, the coffee shop owner had stopped making knowing comments and started making proud comments, mine to bookworms, she would call them, bringing over David's black coffee and Rachel's cappuccino without being asked. She had watched their careful courtship from the beginning, and now she seemed to consider their happiness a personal success story. Their first official date had happened almost by accident. Rachel mentioned wanting to see an old movie that was playing at the Revival Theater downtown, and David said he loved that theater and had been meaning to see the same film. Want to go together? Rachel had asked, then immediately looked surprised at her own boldness. Yes, David had said. Probably too quickly. Definitely yes. The movie was good, but David spent most of it watching Rachel's face in the flickering light from the screen, amazed that this person who had been a mystery for so long was sitting next to him, sharing popcorn and laughing at the same jokes. After the movie, they walked around downtown for 2 hours, talking about films and books and childhood memories and dreams they had forgotten they still had. Now, sitting at their shared table on a Tuesday morning in October, David was working on a new story while Rachel sketched logo ideas for a client. This had become their favorite way to spend time together, working on their own projects, while enjoying each other's company. It felt mature and comfortable and exactly right for two people who had spent a lot of time being alone and were still learning how to be together. What are you writing today? Rachel asked, looking up from her sketches. A story about two people who meet in a coffee shop, David said, not looking up from his laptop. Rachel laughed. You're becoming very predictable. Actually, it's about two people who don't meet in a coffee shop, David corrected. They see each other every day for months but never talk. The story is about all the conversations they don't Having all the chances they don't take. That sounds sad, Rachel said. It is sad. David agreed. But it's also about how sometimes not taking a chance is its own kind of choice. The characters think they're protecting themselves, but they're actually missing out on something that could have been really good. Rachel set down her pencil and looked at him directly. Are you writing about us? I'm writing about the us we almost were, David said. The version where we never got brave enough to talk to each other. I don't like that version, Rachel said firmly. Me neither. That's why I'm making it a cautionary tale. David saved his work and closed the laptop. Writing had gotten easier since he started talking to Rachel, but also more purposeful. Instead of just writing to fill time or work through his own anxieties, he found himself wanting to tell stories that might matter to someone else. Stories about people finding the courage to change their lives, about second chances and unexpected connections, and the ways strangers could become important to each other. Can I read it when you're finished? Rachel asked. Only if you promise not to judge me for how obvious it is, David said. I promise to judge you for how obvious it is, Rachel said with a grin. But I'll still want to read it. This was what David loved most about being with Rachel. How she teased him, but also took his writing seriously. How she gave him space to work, but also showed genuine interest in what he was creating. She had read 3 of his finished stories now, and her feedback was always thoughtful and encouraging. She had also shown him some of her design work, and David was constantly amazed by her talent for taking complicated ideas and making them look simple and beautiful. I have something to tell you, Rachel said, and her tone made David look up from packing his laptop. Good something or concerning something? He asked. Good something, I think. My doctor wants to see me again next week, but just for a regular checkup. All those life changes she suggested are actually working. I feel healthier than I have in years. David reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's definitely good something. The thing is, Rachel continued, I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten that phone call that made me realize I was hiding from life. Would we still be sitting at separate tables, stealing glances and never talking? David considered this. Maybe, or maybe something else would have brought us together eventually. Sometimes I think the universe was getting impatient with us. The universe, think about it. To people who both love books and coffee and quiet mornings. To people who both work better in coffee shops than at home. To people who are both naturally cautious but secretly hoping for connection. What are the odds we would both end up in the same small coffee shop at the same time every day for months without something pushing us together? Rachel smiled. So you think we were meant to meet? I think we were meant to have the chance to meet, David said carefully. What we did with that chance was up to us. As they gathered their things to leave, David thought about how much his life had changed since that morning, when Rachel had walked over to his table looking lost and brave at the same time. He was still the same person who loved quiet mornings and writing stories. But now he was also someone who had learned that taking emotional risks could lead to something beautiful. They walked out of being there together, and David noticed that other customers were starting to arrive for the morning rush. Office workers grabbing coffee to go, students with laptops looking for tables, retired people settling in with newspapers. The coffee shop continued to be a place where people came to start their days. But for David and Rachel, it had become something more, the place where they had learned to stop being afraid of connection. Same time tomorrow, Rachel asked as they reached the corner where they usually parted ways. Same time tomorrow, David agreed. But maybe we could try that new place on 5th Street instead? Rachel looked surprised. You want to leave Bean? They're not leave, David said. Just visit somewhere new. We don't have to stay in the same place forever just because it worked once. Rachel thought about this, then nodded slowly. You're right. We're not the same people who were too scared to talk to each other. Maybe we don't need the same routine either. Besides, David added, Mrs. Chen will still be there when we come back. Some things are worth keeping, but some things are worth changing too. As Rachel headed toward her apartment and David walked toward the bus stop, he found himself thinking about the story he had been writing that morning. The version where two people never found the courage to talk to each other. Where all those coffee shop mornings led nowhere except to more coffee shop mornings. With the same careful distance, that story felt like it belonged to someone else. Now, someone who believed that safety was more important than possibility. That avoiding rejection was worth missing out on connection. David understood that person. He had been that person for most of his adult life. But he wasn't that person anymore. The real story, the one he was living now, was about two people who had spent months preparing for a conversation they didn't know they were preparing for. All those books they had chosen for each other to see. All those glances across the coffee shop. All those mornings of wondering. They had been building something without realizing it. When Rachel finally walked over to his table that Tuesday morning, she hadn't been interrupting his routine. She had been completing it. David got on his bus and found a seat by the window. As the city rolled past, he started mentally drafting a different story. This one would be about two people who almost let fear keep them apart, but didn't. Two people who learned that the scariest conversations sometimes led to the best outcomes. Two people who discovered that slowly wasn't just about being careful. It was about building something strong enough to last. He pulled out his phone and sent Rachel a text. "Thank you for being brave that morning." Her response came back quickly. "Thank you for not letting me walk away." David smiled and put his phone away. Tomorrow they would try a new coffee shop. And maybe the day after that they would try something else new. The routine that had brought them